Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Darkness. Gather round and try to stay in the light. Some of the others from the dark aren't quite as civil as I am, and I hate cleaning up that mess. The Shadow Woman, from Last Bumblebee. This story is from my mother, because though I was there with her when this happened, I was very young at the time, maybe 2 to 3 years old. And she is not the type of person who likes spinning tales about ghosts or other supernatural beings. My mother is the type of curious person who likes to look at open houses just to see what they look like, especially on lazy Sunday afternoons. This particular afternoon, many years ago, she brought me to an open house to look around. It was one of those self-guided houses with no realtor. There were no other buyers inside. My mother is not a paranoid person and was not put off by this at all. She had no reason to be. We looked around the quiet house normally. I was being carried by her, so I only saw what was behind her. The occurrence happened when she was in the garage. I seemed fussy, and she asked me what was wrong. "There's a scary woman there." I pointed to the corner of the garage. My mother sees nothing. "Who?" she asked, a bit creeped out. "There, with the long black hair." My mother left the house immediately. We refer to this incident only as the Shadow Woman. My family is religious, and as such we do believe that demons are real. I do ask myself sometimes if that was one of those evil beings, straining my memory to find the incident. The only thing I come up with is a deep and resounding fear. What disturbs me the most about this is that being a very young child, things like a strange woman usually would not put me off. There must have been some aura about her that scared me. Though I do not remember this incident, it sends chills down my spine to this day. A ghost may have named me. From Good Ash Bad Ash 79. Strange things have happened to me literally since the day I was born. My mom and grandma both recounted this story to me on separate occasions. It's the story of how I got my name. I came into the world on January 10th, 1977, at a hospital called St. Mary's in Reno, Nevada. Being born 1 month premature, I was placed in an incubator to help with jaundice and lung development. The hospital staff took my mother to her recovery room, where she was accompanied by my grandmother. They began discussing name options for me, their top 3 choices being Jennifer, Katie, and Bernadette. My mom had not found a name that really stood out and wasn't completely happy settling on one of these. As they tried to think of other name options, the phone at my mom's bedside table rang. A man, who she said sounded exactly like my deceased father, Edward, said, "Hello, is Colleen there?" His familiar voice caught my mom off guard, and she hesitated, but told him he had the wrong number and hung up. Seconds later, the phone rang again, and he said, "I need to speak with Colleen." My tired mom was getting annoyed and said, "You have the wrong number, you're calling the wrong room," and hung up. He called back a 3rd time, and my mom said, "Let me guess, you're calling for Colleen," to which he simply replied, "Is Colleen there?" and then hung up. My equally annoyed grandma went to the nurse's station to tell the staff about the disruptive calls. The nurse said that nobody named Colleen had previously been registered to the room or was even on that floor of the hospital. The nurse followed my grandma back into my mom's room, where a haze of smoke and the distinct smell of menthol cigarettes struck them both. The nurse angrily said, "There's no smoking allowed in here. Who has been smoking?" Both my mom and grandma, who were non-smokers, looked at each other with confusion and wide eyes. The smell was exactly that of the menthol cigarettes my dad used to smoke. The phone rang again, but this time the nurse picked it up. After she said hello, it just went to a squealing, high-pitched static. My mom unclipped the cord from the phone to prevent any more disruptions, since she wanted to take a nap. The nurse assured my mom that she would check on the source of the smoke to be sure it wasn't coming from an adjacent room. Still repulsed by the strong cigarette smell, she was fanning her hand in front of her face and was about to leave. She paused and turned around, saying, "Oh, I almost forgot. Have you decided on a name yet?" My mom laughed and said, "You know what? I think I like the name Colleen." And so it's been said that my dad, who passed away 4 months before I was born, was somehow able to communicate from the great beyond to name his baby girl. True Scary Stories from A.D. Sinclair. These are real stories about the activity that is happening in my apartment. There have been a lot of things that have been happening in this apartment. I've been living in my current apartment for almost 5 years now, along with my mother, my grandmother, and uncle. It's my senior year, and I guess I have been under a lot of stress, but that does not explain what is going on inside this apartment. It started recently, a few weeks ago. It was about 2:30 a.m., and I was the only one in the house that was awake. I was watching YouTube videos when my room door just opened out of nowhere. I was a bit freaked out, but I figured my mom didn't close the door properly after she left my room earlier that night. I got up, closed the door, and got back into bed. At around 3 a.m., I decided it was time for me to get some sleep. So I put my phone next to my bed and switched off the light. I was laying in bed for about 10 minutes when my door handle started rattling. It creeped the hell out of me. It sounded like someone was trying to open my door. I stayed in bed frozen in fear until eventually I fell asleep. The next thing that happened was on a Friday night. I just got back from my friend's 19th birthday party, and I went straight to my room. I stayed there for a while, watching videos and having leftovers, when I heard footsteps just outside of my bedroom door, going towards the bathroom. I immediately jumped up from my bed and opened the door, and no one was there. I switched the hall light on and looked into the living room, calling for my mom and asking if she just went to the bathroom. She was half asleep on the couch, so it couldn't have been her. My uncle wasn't home that weekend, and my grandmother was in her room on the other side of the apartment. I did not fall asleep that night. I stayed awake until sunrise before I fell asleep. This next story happens after I blessed the house. In my apartment complex, there's a bunch of sage that grows naturally, so I decided to pick some and dry it out. After it was dried out completely, I burnt it and waved the smoke around while saying small prayers, starting from the back of the apartment, making my way through all the rooms and bathrooms, ending in the kitchen. A few hours later, my grandmother came home and started mocking the fact that I blessed the house, making comments about how it's just my imagination. So I told her she shouldn't mock it, but she didn't listen. Keep in mind, my grandmother is one of the biggest skeptics ever. So about 3 days after I blessed the house, I didn't feel a presence in my room anymore, but my grandmother did. She woke up in the middle of the night, feeling the bed dip, as if someone had sat down. At first, she thought it might have been me, because sometimes when my room gives off this creepy vibe, and I know I'm not going to get any sleep, I then climb in the bed by her and sleep there. But that night, I wasn't even at home. I was sitting in the living room the next time my grandmother felt the bed dip. She called for me, saying that she felt something sit down by her, and just as I got to her room, I saw the dip just lift up, as if whoever was sitting down quickly stood up. There hasn't been any other activities around the house lately, except for the occasional tapping coming from the upstairs apartment, which is still vacant. The Chair, from Anonymous. Okay, I'm going to start off by saying I have had many interactions with spirits, or whatever you want to call them. This one sticks out to me the most because it happened recently. My boyfriend and I had received this old recliner in December 2017 from his grandfather that belonged to his great-grandmother. They had bought a new one and didn't have a use for it, so we took it. A couple months later, we ended up moving and not having enough space for it, so we gave it to my parents. It sat in the corner of the living room, and everyone absolutely loved the chair. His great-grandmother became very ill and eventually passed away in May 2018. I was 6 months pregnant around this time. My great-grandfather also passed a few weeks later. Fast forward to October. Our child is now 2 months old. My mom watches her while I'm working. She told me that unexplainable things have been going on. I asked her what. She said that whenever she holds my daughter in the chair, she's always looking past my mom and smiling at the wall. I immediately got chills thinking about it. I began to wonder if either it was my great-grandfather or my boyfriend's great-grandmother, just checking in because there was a new family member. Weeks go by, and the air is literally so thick in my parents' house, it made it uncomfortable to be in there. My mom was constantly having headaches. She tells me that she really thinks there is someone in her house, and that they are very unhappy. I told her that I felt the same thing. And then one night, I had forgotten something of my daughter's at my parents' house, so I had to go back to get it. When I got there, I told my boyfriend I'd be right back, and I quickly ran inside. As soon as I turned the light on in the living room, I saw someone sitting in the recliner. Chills went through my spine. I focused a little more and saw an old person sitting there, just smiling at me. I grabbed what I needed to and said, "No, not today," as I ran outside. I'm completely freaked by the time I get to my car, and I'm trying to process who I just saw. My boyfriend can tell that I'm upset and asks what's wrong, and I couldn't even put it into words. All I said was, "the chair." We get home, and I finally tell him what happened, and he was just as shocked as I was. He asked what the person looked like, and I stared at him while replaying it in my head, and I responded with, "Your great-grandma." He then nodded and said that's what he thought. Well, I called my mom to tell her what I had seen, and she told me she thought that's who it was. I guess my encounter with her really pissed her off, because then she became very violent. She started opening doors and banging on the laundry room walls. My boyfriend and I went over to my parents' house to talk about his great-grandma so my mom could see what she was dealing with, and he told her that she had a rough life. She moved to America from Germany after marrying his great-grandfather. He was a drunk who beat her quite often. She spent the last 5 years of her life in and out of nursing homes, constantly doped up on meds. Whenever I met her before she passed away, she could hardly talk. My mom cleansed the house later that week and threw the chair out, and it has been peaceful ever since. Still to this day, I wonder what she was trying to tell us. I truly believe she had unfinished business. I hope she's resting now. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more. If you have any suggestions for future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And if you would like to hear your story narrated, you can send it to storiesofdarkness55@gmail.com. At the moment, I'm looking for some Christmas stories, so if you have anything like that, please do send it in. And as always, pleasant dreams.